Two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared. Why do you think Moses and Elijah? We might have faith in one area, but God's stretching you to another area that you're going, I don't know, God, I haven't seen this. Anyway, good morning. Welcome back to Shasta Valley Christian Fellowship. We are on Luke 9 this morning. This is part 2. We are not going to finish it yet. There's going to be a part 3. This morning, though, we're going to be looking at Jesus' transfiguration, and he's going to heal a demon-possessed boy. I'm going to make some references. These other verses down here are some references I'm going to be making while I'm talking. I'll just put up there for your benefit. If you want to look them up later, that's fine. Other than that, let's jump into it. So about 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. So while he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at the time what they had seen. Any questions on that so far?
I do. I have one.
Yeah.
Okay, on verse 33, when it says, as the men were leaving, Jesus, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And this is, let us put 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what he was saying. Who did not know what he was saying?
Peter.
Okay.
Yep.
Because the men were going.
That what?
The men were leaving.
Well, he just woke up too.
Oh.
But I'll get to that when we get there.
Okay.
I see a lot of weird things when I first wake up.
Yeah. So back to verse 28. About 8 days after Jesus said this, what did he say? Well, stuff in the previous chapter.
Part of the chapter.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. This chapter, what he said previously. And verse 27, it finishes up with that, truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God. And they believe that this section that we just read is the fulfillment of that.
Oh.
I'm not sold on that yet. There is some good reason for it. I mean, I'm not dogging them. But there's several places where the disciples, you could say that that's when they saw the kingdom of God. So I don't know. It could be, but I'm not going to be very dogmatic about it.
You mean when they were on the mountain?
When they are on the mountain. So what the people that argue that say is that when they woke up and they saw Jesus in his glory and they saw Moses and Elijah there, Peter knew who they were without being told. Moses has been dead for thousands of years. Elijah hasn't been around for a long time either.
And
But
it's
he
not like they have photographs of anybody.
Right. So he still knew who they were without being told. Plus we have God coming in the cloud. And so they say, well, this is a glimpse of the kingdom. And so they figure that's where they get that from. But I see other places in the Bible where the disciples catch glimpses of the kingdom. So it could be all those put together. Jesus could be referring, this guy's going to see it here, this guy's going to see it here, this guy's going to see it here type thing. So we don't know for sure. Anyway, so about 8 days after Jesus said this, if you read the accounts in Matthew and Mark, you're going to say, wait a minute, they said it was 6 days. Don't think this is a contradiction. Luke says it was about 8 days. Two, he's probably bookending it those days with these two experiences, where Matthew and Mark cut off a little different. Plus, like I said before, they counted their days differently than we do. Their days started at dusk and went to the dusk of the next day. Verse 29. So as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Luke uses a different word here for his face becoming, changing. In Matthew and Mark, the Greek word that they use is metamorphosis. It's
Metamorphosis.
Well, it's where we get that word from. It's so it's like the root of that word. Basically, his face was changing into something. It wasn't that it just kind of got distorted or what have you. It changed into something.
Jesus' face.
Jesus' face did.
Okay.
So this whole section, as you read through it, you might start, that sounds familiar. Well, that's why I put these Old Testament passages up here for. Because Moses, he went up Mount Sinai. This doesn't really say what mountain it is. It says the mountain. We know it's not Mount Sinai because they're way north. But he goes up the mountain. When he comes back down after talking to God, his face is so literally bright that they make him put a veil on his face so they can talk to him. They can actually look at him. There's also a cloud that comes down on the mountain when Moses is up there. So verse 30, two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared. Why do you think Moses and Elijah? Why not Abraham or Joseph or one of them?
I don't even put the two together, Moses and Elijah.
Well, they're definitely from different times.
That's what I was
Thinking. Yeah, because Moses was like kind of guiding them towards the promised land. Didn't actually get there. And then Elijah was trying to turn some people around, especially it was after the time when Israel separated from Judah. So, because it was a long time after that. And he was kind of going up against Ahab and Jezebel.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
So
So there's like 1,000 years between Moses and Elijah?
yeah, there's a pretty good amount of time.
Oh.
We could probably look it up on the timeline there, but so Moses and Elijah had a couple things in common. One of them is their end of their walk on earth was not normal. Elijah, when it's time for him to go to heaven, God sends a chariot of fire to pick him up and take him away. He did not die. Moses, he couldn't cross into the promised land. So the Bible tells us that he went up on a mountain and died, and God buried him. No one knows where his grave is to this day.
But he did die.
Yes.
Right? But we read in the New Testament that the devil was arguing with the archangel Michael about Moses' body. Why would they want him to argue about a body? Well, apparently God wasn't done with it yet. He's going to use it to send Moses back.
Are you saying these might be the two witnesses?
That is a very good probability. In Revelation, we read about the two witnesses, and they could very well be those two. Another thing to look at here, when you talk to Jewish people about Moses, he's associated with the books of the law. Elijah is one of the greatest prophets that they ever had. And so you have represented the books of the law and the prophets by those two. If you look in the book of Micah, Micah predicts Elijah's coming. Remember, Jesus said that John the Baptist was kind of a form of Elijah because he foretold his coming. But Micah predicts that Elijah is going to be coming back. We see this happening before his second coming. He'll be coming back for that.
Is it Elijah or is it Elias?
Elijah.
Yeah, mine says
No,
Elias too.
Elias.
It's Elias in the King James.
Okay.
But it's the same person. It's like kind of like how Jesus is actually another spelling for Joshua.
Yeshua. Yeah. Or, yeah.
I meant Joshua.
Well, okay, so, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a whole other rabbit trail.
but anyway.
We're just all over the place.
Yeah, so anyway, those two, they do represent both like the law and the prophets. Then we have Jesus there, and he's kind of the fulfillment of those two. He said he didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it.
Yep.
Now we move on to verse 31. The NIV says they spoke about his departure, which was about to bring fulfillment at Jerusalem, or bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. The King James talks about him being deceased. The Holman Christian talks about his death.
The Greek says Exodus.
The Greek, very good. How did you get that in yours? Footnotes. Yes, about his exodus. I'm glad she brought that up. It kind of works well with where I was going. Yeah, right.
I don't need him to see close up. Yeah.
So think about this now. We have all this Old Testament stuff going on with Moses. Moses is very much associated with the Exodus from Egypt, right? He took God's people out of slavery into freedom. Jesus, on his death on the cross, is going to free his people from the slavery of sin. So we have our own Exodus in Jesus, in that we are able to leave that sin behind us. All right, verse 32. Peter and his companions were very sleepy. When they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. I've heard some scholars talk about this as Jesus' radiance. It's almost like his divinity was shining through the human skin that he had, his humanity. His humanity had been veiling the fact that he was God, and it's kind of showing through at this point. They also talk a lot about how this happened when Jesus went there to pray. The same thing happened when Moses went to talk to God. When he got that, Jesus talked with God, he gets all bright and shiny.
Let your light shine, huh?
Yeah, let your light shine.
Blind people.
There's a cute story about I think he was a pastor back east somewhere. And so he thinks that if he spends enough time praying with God, that he'll start to glow like Moses does. So he spends this, I can't remember, this incredible amount of time just constantly in prayer. And he's a married guy. So one evening, he's out with his wife at dinner. And this waitress just keeps staring at him.
Oh.
And he thinks to himself, he goes, I bet that, that light of God is just shining through me.
What it is.
So the waitress, and he tells his wife that, and then the waitress comes over and asks him, she goes, are you Hugh Hefner?
Oh,
Total opposite. So anyway, it's a cute story. Yeah. Notice that Peter, him and his buddies, they always seem to have a hard time staying awake when important stuff's going on.
Oh, then you can't get mad at us if we fall asleep.
Right.
It does in so many places. They're sleeping.
Yeah.
They're sleeping.
All right, let's go on to verse 33. So as the men were leaving, that's Moses and Elijah, Peter's kind of in this state of like, oh, wow, this is awesome. And I kind of get where he's coming from. It's like, let's keep this thing going. Let's keep the party going. This is really cool.
Like, so we'll build a shelter, you can stay.
Yeah, I'll build you guys each a little house. Not house, but the word is tabernacle, which is just a quick shelter they put up. The Jews have the Feast of Tabernacles, which helps them to look back at their exodus out of Egypt. Again, we're back to the Exodus theme. There were quick shelters that they would put up when they would go to different places. So he's saying, yeah, let's put up this shelter. So, one for Moses and you and Elijah.
So everybody can hang out.
Yeah, so we can just keep this thing going. It says he doesn't know what he was saying. There's a lot of ideas about what could be meant by that statement. One thing that we might want to look at, though, is he's basically put Moses and Elijah on the same level with Jesus.
Oh,
These are all just great men. And the reason we kind of look at that way is because God comes on the scene and says, "This is my son.
yeah.
Don't mess this up. This is my son." So why is that a bad thing? Well, we as humans can tend to take something that God gives us as a blessing and worship it. We see this, that's why I put this last verse on here. I'll paraphrase it. Basically, God says, when you go into, or whenever I do something that you know that I did, I bless you in some way, I help you win a victory over a great army or something like that, said, worship me. You can build an altar and worship me. But when you do it out of plain earth or uncut stones. Because, and he says in there, if you put a tool to the stone, you defiled it.
Oh, wow.
Indicating that that altar that you made could become the item of your worship and not God.
It's not saying we're adding our own flawedness to it?
It could be. But you'll start taking pride in what you made there rather than worshiping God.
So like the golden calf that they made,
Yeah,
the Israelites made,
yeah. That'd be another idol that
that
they,
would be an idol, yeah.
Some of the,
But-
some of the churches.
But what about
are-
all the specifications that they did for the altar that's in the temple and whatnot?
that was different. Those are looking towards the kingdom, actually heaven.
Okay. So they need to be to God's specifications?
Yeah. He specified exactly how to do that stuff. But as far as when they did something they wanted to praise God for, they weren't supposed to build anything special for it.
Well, like Debbie said, some of those Catholic churches, people will go just to see them because they're so beautiful.
Yeah, you're looking at the stonework and the sculptures and
Pictures on the wall, on the ceilings.
yeah.
It really, I bet it really is fantastic to,
Oh, no
to
doubt.
look at.
I'm sure the artwork is great, but
Yeah.
we got to make sure that we remember to worship Christ or God and not the
The item,
item.
yeah.
And I've touched on this before that Peter had no way of knowing who these guys were unless God revealed it to him. So in that moment, he could have had a glimpse of the kingdom of God because he had some supernatural knowledge just implanted on him there.
Why do you think they were there visiting and talking? What do you think they were talking about?
Well, it tells us that they're talking about his departure.
Oh, it's departure.
His exodus is his death, which most people look at as the cross. Some people say it's his actual ascension later, but most people look at it as his work on the cross, what was about to happen. So we're going to verse 34. In verse 33, Peter's just said, let's make these shelters. Verse 34, while he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud.
So this is Peter, right?
Peter, James, and John.
Okay, that,
It covered all of them.
who was speaking?
Peter was
This is
speaking,
Pete?
yes.
Okay,
So Peter's speaking, this cloud just come along and engulfed them.
okay.
And they're starting to get kind of worried here.
Yeah, I'd understand that.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. It's like, did we die already? Or then a voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him."
Is that the same thing he said when he was baptized?
Well, he says, "Whom I'm well pleased." But yeah,
Oh,
basically, he. I think what he's doing there is
announcing.
helping Peter and probably James and John all together. Peter's he's the one with the mouth. He speaks up when everybody else is just thinking it.
So is this James, Jesus' brother?
This is James and John were brothers. They were fishermen, sons of Zebedee.
Okay.
This is part of the group of inner three that were really close to Jesus when he was doing stuff. So yeah, so he's saying, "This is my son." He's wanting them to understand that Jesus is not just a man. He's fully human, but he's also fully God. And they're still not getting it. I don't think they get it even now. It's going to be later on.
Well, it was kind of irritating earlier in this chapter. It's like Jesus has been repeatedly saying, hey, I'm gonna die,
Right.
and they don't get it.
Yeah, what's bad is the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees all got it.
Uh-huh.
They knew what was going to happen, and the disciples
They
didn't.
understand why.
Yeah. Verse 36. When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen. Later on, they're going to blab about to everybody. But right now, they're going to keep it
Just
really, yeah. They're going to go down off the mountain with a bunch of cheesy grins.
Something happened.
Just kind of like, feeling really good in the moment. And people are going to go, what happened to you guys? Like, oh, I can't talk about it. So Jesus heals the demon-possessed boy. The next day, this is verse 37, the next day when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met him. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only child. A spirit seizes him, and he suddenly screams. It throws him into convulsions so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not." "You unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." Even while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the impure spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God. So they're coming down from the mountain to Transfiguration, right? They're coming down. This large crowd, everywhere they went, there was a large crowd meeting him. I don't know if the rest of the disciples were kind of running interference for the guys while they went up on the mountain to kind of keep the crowd back.
From even going up the mountain.
Yeah. They come down, and there's a guy there begging him because his only son is got a demon. And this demon presents itself almost like someone who has epilepsy. It
That's
sounds
what
like.
I was just thinking. That's what I was just thinking.
This does not mean that every person that has epilepsy has a demon,
Or vice versa.
or vice versa. Because there are certain medical conditions that can cause you to have convulsions. Anyway, some demons can cause symptoms that would appear as being mental or physical ailments. But that doesn't mean that every mental or physical ailment is because of a demon. There are people that will argue that. Let's go to verse 40. So I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not. He says, "You unbelieving and perverse generation." King James says faithless. What's another one? Another where it says perverse, some translations might say twisted. The word that's translated unbelieving or faithless, we find that same word in Greek where Thomas doubts that Jesus is risen. So Jesus comes back, sees all the guys except Thomas, and they're telling Thomas about it, and Thomas is going, "I'm not going to believe it unless I stick my hands in his wounds." And so when he finally meets up with Jesus, and he does that, he goes, "Well, I believe." Jesus says that you believe because you saw. It's that same Greek word for believe. This translates unbelieving. So it's not like these people didn't believe at all. It's just they apparently they didn't have that point of contact for their faith that said that they could do this, because Jesus had given the disciples authority to take care of this stuff. But apparently they didn't believe that they had it. We'll find out later in this chapter, they're going to get really jealous because somebody who's not with them is driving out demons.
That's funny.
So that might come back to that too.
Somewhere else.
So verse 41, we're back on there still. Unbelieving and perverse. The unbelieving, that's actually a better translation, I think, than the King James being faithless. Because they had faith, it's just that there was a point which they couldn't get past in their belief to do this. So they bring the boy to him, and the boy has another attack from this demon, and Jesus heals him and gives him back. And Luke doesn't tell us that part that you're talking about, but it did happen at this instance. I'm not sure if it'd be in Matthew or Mark that he does say to them, some of these can only be driven out by prayer or can only be taken care of by prayer. And then the last sentence there, and they were all amazed at the greatness of God. We should all give praise to God every day.
And especially, we can be that same exact faithless and unbelieving generation.
We can, because we might have faith in one area, but God's stretching you to another area that you're going, I don't know, God, I haven't seen this. And that comes back to kind of our carnal, if you will, human nature that relies on our senses to translate or to understand the world around us. So if we can't, see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, hear it, then it doesn't exist, right? And that's where a lot of people have a hard time with God, because God works in the spiritual realm, which is beyond those senses. So, yeah, I really need to come up with better endings to these. Anyway, you guys have any questions? I need to come up with better endings to these. When I'm doing the videos, I end it right here. It's like, I didn't close that out. I just...
Normally all you say is bye, YouTube.
Yeah. No. All right, let's, actually, so bye, YouTube. Let's just end that part.